Hello everyone, hope you guys are doing well. I think the live stream should have started now, so do let me know if it's working. But I just wanted to do a quick video really just looking at Club World Cup Fantasy, how to play, as I'll be doing some content for it. And I think it's quite similar to some of the kind of international tournaments that we've played. Maybe if people have experience in let's say, playing Champions League Fantasy, they would have also had a good gist of how to play the game. But just wanted to recap quickly some of the new changes in terms of rules that I've not seen before. And I think interesting things to point out on, and not just how to play necessarily, but actually how to strategize for this tournament and what I think is probably best practices going forward. So in terms of a simple how to play, it's just a standard fantasy game. You'll have a team of 15 players. You start effectively with, a free wild card. You get to choose your team with a 100 million pound budget. After that, you're just going to jump into, let's say, creating a team, and then we'll look at that in a minute. But I think the crucial thing is you can find this game online on play.fifa.com/fantasy, and you can also find it on the FIFA app, where you should be able to kind of create a FIFA account and then also therefore make your fantasy team there. The rules are very standard in terms of having 2 goalkeepers, 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, 3 forwards. So I don't think there's too much to discuss here. But what I will say is, of course, there are tournament restrictions. So at the group stage, which would be match day 1, match day 2, match day 3, the tournament is comprised of a pretty short informal group stage where everyone plays 3 matches. So match day 1, match day 2, match day 3, as I said, is a group stage. After that, it becomes a playoff round of the tournament. What's crucial, I would say here, is you can only have 3 players per club, but there's an interesting chip strategy element to it where even within the group stage, you can extend this to 4 players for a single match day if you choose to use the kind of 12-man chip, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But just as per any kind of big tournament, you get to kind of increase that team threshold as we advance further into the tournament and as more teams drop out of it. And that's really it, quite simple. Formation wise, I think it's very similar to other fantasy games, but once again, the kind of live substitution elements or what we call manual substitution elements of the game are very much present. So the first match of the tournament is the Miami game, where you get to see Messi, for example, and his team play. But then every single game that's not hosted at the exact same time, you can actually substitute players in and out. The big difference between that and UCL Fantasy, for example, is if you remember UCL Fantasy, you almost have a lock-in day. So even though there's a game earlier on in the day, you almost need to make your changes for the entire set of games within a certain day. Whereas with this tournament, you can almost make changes from a substitution perspective and even, let's say, a captaincy change perspective between singular games, as long as they're not hosted at the exact same time. So if I had a game starting at 3 p.m., and then the next game was at 6 p.m., in theory, I could actually make substitutions as soon as possible. So that's kind of the very manual element of the game, but you can still take a lightweight approach to it, right? You don't have to be super focused on making changes all the time. I think you can still approach it with almost making 1 or 2 sets of changes per match day and keeping it to that. You don't have to be that focused on making changes. In terms of player prices, these are subject to change. Or sorry, actually, no, I think the player prices are fixed. Apologies about that. But crucially, the captaincy element of the game can be swapped around quite a fair bit. So that's quite nice. In terms of team management and substitution, so as I've already explained, I've kind of discussed that already. If you don't do manual substitutions, you'll just have automatic substitutions, but that's really just based on whether you have players in your team that don't play, therefore an auto sub comes in. So very standard compared to FPL. In terms of, let's say, boosters, right? So these are what we call chips. The Wildcard, I think, is the most strongest chip in the game, as anyone would know. Traditionally, when we look at a game like FPL, you tend to use the wild card maybe as late as possible, right? You try to create a well thought out team that lasts a couple match days at a time, maybe game weeks at a time. Match days is almost the same translation of game weeks, but with the wild card, you actually are probably incentivized to use it early on in a tournament like this, because the crucial thing about transfers is the further you go into the tournament. Sorry, so here it is. So transfers, I mean, the further you go into the tournament, the more you actually have transfers. So let's say when we get past the group stage, you get a wild card again. So on match day 4, you have the opportunity to completely reset your team, which is sort of highlighted by this being unlimited in the round of 16. And after that, you actually get 4 transfers, then 5 transfers, then 6 transfers. And crucially, of course, with the final, you don't even need substitutions. So it's more incentivized to use a wild card here in match day 2 or match day 3. I myself am probably going to do a chip strategy video that's quite focused on why I plan to do a match day 2 wildcard. But I think one of the pros and cons in terms of chip strategy is on match day 3, we expect rotation, because if you're a big team and if you've won your first 2 games, in theory, I suppose you don't care so much about match day 3. So very much like an international tournament where a team has already qualified, in match day 3, it's going to be a high potential for a lot of good teams to actually rotate very heavily on match day 3. So maybe you might want to save your wild card for match day 3. On the other hand, I think in match day 2, you have an opportunity to probably target match day 1 and create a team that's very focused on the best games on offer in match day 1. So that's basically a free hit if you kind of wanted to compare it to a traditional FPL chip strategy element. And then you almost treat match day 2 and 3 as a combo. So, you know, you either approach it where you plan a team for match day 1 and 2, or you plan it for a free hit in match day 1, and then almost a wild card that will hit game weeks 2 and 3, like so. So what I like a lot about how match day 3 works is, unfortunately, there's a lot of good teams that actually have really good games in match day 1 that face off versus each other. So Bayern versus Benfica is in match day 3, whereas Bayern have the easiest matchup in the entire group stage in match day 1. So from a strategy perspective, I kind of like the idea of going all out on Bayern match day 1, wildcarding into a match day 2 team, and not actually having any Bayern players in my team in match day 2, most likely, because they're actually extremely expensive anyways. And I think there are better teams that actually have better sets of fixtures when it comes to 2 and 3 combined. So that's kind of my general intuition, right? I think you have to wildcard on 2 or 3. If you save it for a little bit later in the tournament, that's fine. But if we go back to the other chips, I mean, you have to play. I mean, you can save some of these chips for later in the rounds, but you do have a mystery booster chip in the knockout stages of the tournament, and so that's something to think about there. I would use the wildcard, as I said, in the group stage. The 12-man chip, I think, is also very beneficial to do in the group stage. The reason being, and the same with the maximum captain chip, if possible, because usually what happens with these kind of tournaments is the further you go into the tournament, the less one-sided the games are. Right now we have games like Bayern versus Auckland City, and that is an extremely one-sided game. I don't think we'll get a more one-sided game in the tournament when it comes to betting odds. So, you know, you're incentivized to actually use these chips to maximize on, let's say Harry Kane, for example, playing in match day 1, or getting another 4th Bayern player with your 12-man chip on match day 1. And with the wildcard, as I mentioned, you probably also want to use it in the group stage. And so if you're planning your chip strategy out, I think focus on creating a wildcard strategy first, which will then sort of, you know, decide your team structure. And then you can actually think about, okay, do I want to use a 12-man chip here to basically just have an unlimited sort of player, because you don't actually have to spend money on that 12th man, right? It's just a free player. And I think the only thing I can say about the 12-man chip is you should probably, let's say if I plan to have Kane, Haaland, and Mbappe in my team, these are the most expensive players in the game in match day 1, I should use the 12-man chip on Haaland or Mbappe, because they are the most expensive players of my team that I'm unlikely to captain, whereas I'm most likely to get a captain Kane, so I can't 12-man Kane, and therefore by, you know, not spending the additional 11 million on a Haaland or Mbappe, I get to use the rest of my 100 million pound budget for the rest of my team. So that I think is quite crucial in terms of actual rules on point scoring, because I think that's the most interesting element of this tournament. The scoring system is actually much more aggressive compared to other fantasy games. So the appearance points are exactly the same. It's effectively 2 appearance points over the course of the tournament for a single match, as long as you basically hit that 60-minute threshold. Assists are exactly the same. Yellow cards and red cards pretty much the same. Winning a penalty a little bit less compared to usual games. So this is more similar to UCL fantasy, where winning a penalty actually gives you 2 points. The pro of winning a penalty is actually you don't need to actually wait for the penalty to be scored to get a penalty assist. You just get the points for winning a penalty in general. As far as conceding a penalty, of course, that's new and that's detrimental towards defenders. For goalkeepers, I think I'm going to skip that because it's not too interesting, but it's actually 5 clean sheet points. And also, you know, 3 points for the penalty save. You know, there's actions, of course, for goals scored, but that's unlikely to happen, but it could happen. So you never know. And then +1 for every 3 saves, which is very similar to most fantasy games. What's interesting though is in terms of defenders, midfielders, and attackers, you can see that the goal scored point is actually +1 compared to most games because there's no bonus element within the game. But actually, clean sheet points are also +5 for defenders. So what you can kind of glean from this is that actually defense, I think, is very important in this tournament, particularly focusing on getting defenders who actually have an extremely high clean sheet percentage. If you compare it to other fantasy games, I think clean sheets are definitely less valuable. And another thing that kind of is a steroid to this is going to be quite helpful would be something that I'll look at later, which is another sort of new fantasy rule that they've introduced. But for midfielders, you get every 3 tackles +1 point, every 2 chances created +1 point. What I don't really like about the tackle rule is tackles are very hard to get within fantasy games. If anyone has played, for example, UCL fantasy, or let's say the European Championship fantasy from last season, you will notice that actually it's based on ball recoveries. Ball recoveries tend to happen much more often than tackles. The definition of a tackle, I think, is you almost have to win a one-on-one type duel. It's not things like winning aerial challenges. So actually, if you look at, let's say, Premier League records for most tackles in a season, they tend to be happening almost at 1/2 the rate of ball recoveries. So whilst the European Championship fantasy element of the game had a lot of points on offer for ball recoveries, I think this time round on this tournament, you should not be focusing on tackles because tackles are very, very hard to create within this tournament. As far as 2 chances created, though, I think anytime you pick someone who is, a highly creative attacking midfielder, you're going to benefit from that. Of course, there are deep lying playmakers who can get tackles, but my main argument to not focusing on players like that who are playing a little bit more deeper and have less opportunities to get, involved in goals, involved in assists is you already get the +1 for additional goal scored compared to other fantasy games. So just because there's a new rule that's been created for 2 chances created, you should not be focusing on these because it's less routes towards points. More often than not, someone like, let's say, I don't know, a Cole Palmer, a Bruno Fernandes, who's not in this tournament, of course, but these sort of midfielders that actually have opportunities to get goals because they're on penalties, because they very often do show up in goal scoring positions. Although I acknowledge that Palmer hasn't really scored many goals in 2025. These types of players are still players that I think ultimately you should be focused on and prioritizing over. And then with forwards, the interesting thing is actually I think forwards benefit a lot because they get 2 points for every shots on target, and then they actually get the additional point for the goal scored. So from 4 points in, let's say, a game like FPL to 5. And I think the big pro here in terms of shots on target as well is it's quite easy to find games where strikers hit 2 shots on target, even though there's huge differentials in terms of the qualities of teams within this opponent in this tournament. So that's interesting. But in terms of bonus points now, goal from a direct free kick is quite nice, but I think if you're focusing on attackers, you'll be fine. You'll most likely actually have players who actually get goal scorers. It's also quite similar to, let's say, the European Championship or UCL fantasy element of the game where you have goals outside the box. Here it's kind of narrowed down to this sort of goal from direct free kick bonus. But the most important change in this game, I think the most fun rule in this game, is the scouting bonus. The scouting bonus is if any of your players score more than 4 points in a match and is in fewer than 5% of all team selection, they get +2 points within the game. And that's so crucial. I can't explain how important that is because if you think about, going back to clean sheets, going back to assists, going back to just getting a goal score, for example, as long as you're able to actually do any of these things within a match, you will get access towards this +2 as long as your player is sub 5% owned. And I think if I wanted to use examples, right, if I look at, let's say, clean sheet odds for teams like Bayern, like Man City, like maybe Juventus for match day 1, they're all above 50%. So actually, you can almost add in like an additional fake +1 effective a point to any player who is playing within those teams. For example, for a defender, that might not be like an attacking fullback, right? Attacking fullbacks are very likely to be extremely high ownership. But if you're looking at, let's say, central defenders are most likely to get this bonus because if you can find a central defender that plays for any of these teams, that will start for those teams. So what's a good example? Lloyd Kelly, Manuel Akanji, and then what's the other team that I mentioned? I think Juventus, City, and Bayern. So within the case of Bayern, of course, maybe Eric Dyer, for example, just because they don't have many players available from a defensive point of view. So these sorts of players with extremely low ownership could actually give you that differential point. Now, of course, I think on the Bayern side of the situation and even the Man City side of the situation, it still might be the case that, let's say, without Ryan Aitner joining Man City, Guardiola could play left back, right? Or if I was to use Rafael Guerrero as an example, he's extremely attacking as a fullback, and sometimes even plays minutes in the 10. So the pro of this is, of course, don't always just go for sub 5% EO players, because there still might be defenders who are that good that you still have to pick them over the central defender. But now I think it's a much closer decision to be made. And so that's it. But that's in terms of leaderboards, in terms of leagues. I have a mini league. The league code is in the description. The league link is also in the description if you just want to click an auto join link as well. Let's actually just have a look at how to create a team and what that kind of looks like right now. So this is almost the team setup page. This is my team itself. But then in terms of how to move yourself around the website and actually set up your team, I've already put a chip in place, so that's quite interesting. I've used most of my budget already. I've selected my players. In terms of picking players, all you have to do is, for example, click on this button, which is make transfers. Click on this button as well, which allows you to actually identify and search for players manually, because when you're on the default page of the website, all you're going to be looking at is something that looks like this, and you'll find it extremely hard to search for players. So click on this button, then you can actually find and search for all the players you want. It's not so easy right now to filter ownerships of players, but actually remember the rule that we talked about, right? You want to have players that have less than 5% ownership. How do I check that? A simple way, for example, to check for someone within my own team is I just click on the player, and then actually that's it. I've got the fixture on the right hand panel if I want to click onto that. And what I talked about fixtures is quite important, right? Because, for example, with my goalkeepers, in theory, they actually play on the same day, right? They play on June the 17th, but because the UCL rules aren't in place, I can still have goalkeepers from the same day because they just don't play at the same time. So as long as I'm active after some point after 2 a.m. and I can switch things around into, let's say, going for my goalkeeper here from River Plate, I can actually have a goalkeeper from the same day. But yeah, on the overview page, you can already see the selection percentage of a certain player. So the way that I've actually created my team right now is I've actually identified as many good players that I think have a good match day 1 to fit my wildcard 2 strategy. And these are all sub 5% owned players, except for Armani, of course. So I probably will have to change around because I don't really want to keep someone who is sub 5% or someone who is over 5% and is already a differential, right? So Wesley, for example, fits this purpose. Akanji fits this purpose. Alex Telles currently fits this purpose. I think his ownership could explode. He took a penalty last night for Botafogo. Cambiaso is already at 5%, so I'm extremely sad about that. I'll have to change my draft around. Guardiola is over 5%, but I think he'll stay within my team just because he's got such a one-sided game, and it's already extremely tough to actually pick 3 City players. But that's pretty much how I would look for players. That's really it in terms of the tournament, right? In terms of managing my team, if I take a step back, I can, for example, deactivate my chip as well. So you can activate and deactivate chips on the panel quite easily. This is quite nice compared to, let's say, regular fantasy Premier League, for example, where unfortunately, once you activate a chip, most often than not, you can't really deactivate it. So Maximum Captain, 12th Man, Mystery Booster, these are chips where you can fortunately activate and deactivate them. With the wild card, however, I think once you activate them, you can't deactivate it again. So do watch out if you're planning to use the wild card. This isn't relevant to match day 1, but will be relevant for you in match day 2 and 3. As I said, I do think that the most one-sided game in the tournament is going to be this Bayern game. So maybe it actually makes sense to actually do Maximum Captain Kane, but I also can't guarantee that Kane's minutes are going to be perfect. What if they actually absolutely stomp Auckland and, I don't get access to that? So I think Maximum Captain Kane is probably one of the best strategies, or 12th man Bayern or 12th man Mbappe. Because as you can see with my team here, I've got Haaland, but I don't have Mbappe. And so I think 12th man Mbappe makes a lot of sense. 12th man for a Bayern player, if we can get a leak potentially over what the potential Bayern starting lineup would be quite helpful. Currently, right now, you can see that I don't have Musiala in my team, but that's simply because Musiala is coming back from an injury. I don't see him being thrown in straight to an extremely easy matchup versus Auckland City and starting. But maybe he will start the game. But I just think that Ulisse and Nabi right now probably have the safest minutes coming to this game, where I expect Musiala to be benched. And the rest of my team actually pretty much resembles my structure. The how to score is also illustrated on this panel here when you're picking your teams. And you can just join a mini league here if you want to just join my mini league, for example, right now. But that's it. That's kind of the how to play section of the tournament. Let's just jump into a little bit of a Q&A whilst I kind of leave it on the panel of my team. Right. Drawing Dead, nice to see you around. The big question is about the captaincy. I wonder if we can change the captaincy between every single match of a game week. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that once you've locked in your captain, like, and they've played the game, I don't think you can swap it around. So yeah. Nice lunch break stream. Yeah, absolutely. What sources do you use to look at for clean sheet odds? I mean, I think what you can do is, for example, go on websites like spreadix.com. You can obviously look at some sort of aggregators of kind of clean sheet odds online as well, and they can actually provide you those kind of odds. I will actually be presenting all these kind of, I guess, like match betting level of data to help us make better decisions going forward. So I think for match day 1 and match day 2, my plan is to share the odds before the tournament starts. Because there's no real point sharing the match day 3 odds, I think, because if you think about it like this, right, either you're following my strategy, which is you're building a team for match day 1 only, and you're focused on that, and then you wildcard, or you're focused on a wildcard 2, which also means, or a wildcard 3 rather, sorry, which means that you're not focused on match day 3 anyway. So when we get a little bit more information in the tournament, I will share with you some of the kind of modeled percentages for clean sheets in match day 3. But I think it's most important for us, given that we're planning to wildcard in the group stage, to just look at the odds for match day 1 and match day 2, depending on what your strategy is. But I will share that kind of level of detail and team strengths, etc., quickly. You can filter ownership percentage stats. That's awesome. So actually, that's even better. You can only change the captain once if your captain has played already. So if I have Caney does nothing, I can only change it once more after. Yeah, so it's quite similar to UCL, right? In theory, because in UCL, for example, you basically only have the opportunity to really swap your captaincy once. I will be getting a cheat sheet out. I think I'll be going through a lot of the detail, as I said, for the data from match day 1 and match day 2. You can find this game, Graham, in play.fifa.com/fantasy. So that's kind of how you get towards the website. Ponchan, nice to see you around as a member for 9 months. Appreciate that. How can we be sure of a player's exact ownership before transferring him in? I think, look, the most important thing is probably, make a transfer close towards the deadline and click on that button, check their ownership, make sure that it's not over 5%, and that's really it. Have I put together a match day 2 wildcard draft? No, because I don't really see the point of putting together a draft right now when so much can change, right? Like a couple of injuries can make it completely redundant. And I think one of the big things about a tournament like this is we so infrequently watch a South American and African or let's say a European team face off. Our interpretation of team strengths is going to radically change as well, in my opinion, after match day 1. So I'm totally open to the idea of pivoting my match day 2 draft a lot. But I think what's beautiful about my strategy, not that I'm saying that a wildcard 3 is bad. I think a wildcard 3 makes a lot of sense because you can target some teams that have some really good games in 1 and 2 collectively. But the opportunity to move into flamenco players is actually quite nice. I think Juventus players are also really low owned. I think there's Bayern midfielders that people don't like for example, Gnabry, and I understand that. At the same time, there's players in the game who are too cheaply priced, like Mastantuono and Samu as well, my striker in the front line here, that are very hard to sort of ignore because they're so cheap. There's also still players that are like Abu Ali as well, very cheap forward who actually has extremely high ownership. So, on that case basis, I probably would still pick Samu, who's over 5%. But yeah, there's a lot of options available. What I do like is simply moving from this type of structure here, moving into, let's say, in match day 2, match day 3. I think PSG and Real Madrid have amazing games in match day 2 and 3, better than their match day 1 games. PSG's versus Atletico Madrid, right? They're coming off a Champions League final. Their toughest game for the tournament up until the playoff stages is going to be that Atleti game. So no reason for me to be invested into some extremely expensive PSG players if I can ignore them for match day 1. And then I can shift on over to them in match day 2 and 3. And one of the things I do want to mention as well is taking a hit in this game actually only costs 3 points. So compared to traditional FPL or even UCL fantasy to an extent, I think taking hits is very much incentivized in this game. If you think about how high the threshold is for players to get points, like for example, if someone gets a goal, that's already better than in other games, right? So the effective value of someone who has a really good game, has much higher goal scoring odds, is already there. And then you have less of a disincentivization almost to not take a hit for those players, because taking a hit is 3 points and you're going into players who are most likely going to get more points than they would on any other projected fantasy game. So that I think is quite interesting and quite worth looking into. Like I would incentivize taking hits in this tournament if you feel you just want to get a little bit more upside. I can see that there's a lot of value to that. But that's really it for now. I think I've answered most of the questions in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter as well. I'll be kind of posting a little bit more about the tournament, and on the weekend I'll be working on the cheat sheet. So I'll probably put out maybe a best attackers and best defenders level of cheat sheet, so 2 videos in that, and then I'll share my sort of, this is probably going to be my wildcard 1 drop. So if you've watched this video, I'll probably explain in more detail why I've come towards this structure and why I've come towards this chip strategy in another video. But yeah, I think that's the short rundown right now for this game, and I'm looking forward to it. Also, I think there might be an opportunity where maybe we can share some projected points, projected goal scoring odds for singular players, as opposed to just team level data. So someone asked about clean sheet odds. I'll share those kind of team level detail very, very quickly. But I think player level detail is something that we're all looking forwards to, and that will also come hopefully over the weekend. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this video does help out anyone who's actually interested in playing. I think the rules in terms of the sub 5% ownership thing actually does put a lot of spice into the game. I think unfortunately some players are very radically priced. Like once again, Franco Mastantuono, as long as he stays in River Plate for this tournament, he's too cheap in my opinion. De Arrascaeta as well, or Arrascaeta from Flamengo as well is also a little bit too cheap, right? So that is something that's not so great. But I think you also equally, in my opinion, can't go into this tournament just picking players that have sub 5% ownership. Like, I think passing up on, let's say, a Kane or an Olise, and arguably even, for example, like someone like maybe a Haaland or Mbappe, right? Someone in one of the two, doesn't make too much sense, because there's so many cheap players that kind of give you the opportunity to maximize your effective points. But maximizing effective points doesn't come purely from just the sub 5% thing, because that's only it's a flat +2, right? And you might not even get it. So that's why I still think it's important to find places and gaps in your team. And I think defenders are the best case for this, right? Because there's a lot of teams that actually have pretty good clean sheet odds heading towards this first set or first stage of the tournament. And you can get a lot of value from them. For the midfielders, it's a little bit different, right? Because there's only a few teams that have absolutely explosive goal scoring kind of odds. So or players that are on all sorts of things like free kicks, penalties, corners, etc., and have the opportunity to create chances, have good chances of scoring themselves or assisting. So that's, I feel, quite restrictive in terms of the attacking point of view. But I think defense is where we get a lot of that sub 5% value, and I'm looking forward to play. But that's it. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys soon.